Greetings, and welcome to Stuffology, where two old friends sit around and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis pretty much for the sake of it. My name is McQuarrie, and I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you? And also, welcome to a new album.
Yes, and isn't that exciting that we've been on the crest of a wave, and maybe we're almost at the very top of the height of the peak of the summit of the roof of the wave, if any of those words can be applied to waves.
Sure.
Yeah, it's exciting times.
It's exciting time. We move on from Rubber Soul, and we finally managed to get our teeth into Revolver.
And it's good to get our teeth into it as well. I think it is, because it is an album with some bite. There you go. Thank you very much. And also, it's an album that embraces both literacy and numeracy. After all, we start the album with some counting.
Well, we sure do, although not for the first time either, it should be noted.
Oh, yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, in a song that does also relate to maths. Yeah, good point.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
I'd forgotten. Yeah,
Yeah.
there you go. But then that was a long time ago, and a long time since I've been 17.
It does feel like a long time, doesn't it? I mean, since the
Yeah.
song, we'll gloss over any personal chronologies in this.
Yes, absolutely. Anyway, Taxman.
Yeah,
I mean,
Taxman.
this and okay, right. So, let's get into this. Revolver, amazing. I don't really know when I first found out about Revolver, because when we were growing up, um, I don't know about you, but I didn't read much about the Beatles. I think we've said before that we were aware of the singles if they got played on the radio. But then it was only for me, I think, as a teenager, talking to other people who were developing an interest in music and finding out about the things that they were listening to, that I really then got further into the Beatles. And it was only, I think, through eventually just trying to complete the cassettes that I was buying from Beano's in Croydon, that then led me to get Revolver. So it was, a reasonable way down the line, but it was such an exciting thing to listen to. And at that point as well, Taxman was a phenomenally exciting thing to listen to. I will be honest and say that my views of it have changed a bit over time, and certainly my views towards the lyrical content have altered. I suppose, as in many ways, my politics have altered since I was 14, 15, 16 as well. But it still is a start of an album that really has some amazing impact. Um, so yeah, anyway, so that's a good start. I do think we are hitting the high watermark, crest of the wave, insert your own metaphors. Whether or not Taxman is the apogee of all of that, on this album, um, I would say not for me, Clive, to use a football cliche, but it's pretty darn good way to start an album, isn't it?
It's not bad. It's not bad at all. I mean, one of the fascinating things about going through the songs in the way that we're doing it is just how starkly it lays out the evolution of the music that we are listening to. So even before we touch on the lyrical content, about which I feel we have much to say, just the way that the music has been evolving over even just like the last half a dozen songs that we've listened to, from sort of maybe something like Wait Forward, through Run for Your Life, and then Paperback Writer and Rain. The evolution of the sound and the development of the way that songs are being put together has just been, I hate using words like transformational, but I honestly can't think of an appropriate synonym that isn't just that, because that's really what it is. The way that this song sounds, the way that it starts, even with that countdown that we mentioned before, it's not the excited 1, 2, 3, 4 of like a hungry rock and roll band. It's droll. It's slightly, drawled out 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's a completely different tone that it's setting for the album to come, which is appropriate. But just musically, I mean, it's a kind of a cliche to say that like Revolver is the best guitar album or the best sounding guitar album ever recorded. But also, there's a reason that people say that. And you know, Taxman is the start of that. I mean, just McCartney's solo in the middle of this is just beyond breathtaking. Like, there's certainly never been another Beatles guitar solo that sounds anything like that. And whilst obviously they're not immune to influences, and particularly influences coming from, you know, the clubs that they're hanging out in and the blues kind of side, like, there's nothing that sounds like that in a Beatles album. So even like right from like the 2 minute mark in this song, we're again just, yeah, to use the T word, transforming what we're listening to.
This album, and we'll talk about the album, but really, you know, Taxman is representative. This is my first opportunity to mention this. Something that really strikes me on a lot of this album is the sparseness of it. And I was again reminded of that. I've been revisiting a lot of Stone Roses music. I mean, there's not there's that much of it in the last couple of weeks since the bass player Manny died. And there's a surprising number of videos from their various reunion tours in, you know, the 2010s. And I was really surprised, and never having actually seen them live, that it is just the four of them, that it is just bass, drums, guitar, and, well, whatever it is that Ian Brown did. You know, you can call it singing if you want, but, you know, let's not get into that.
It's obviously a generous
Um,
description.
well, yeah, yeah. Well, okay. I'm just to leap in. There was that I was watching a little bit of Anthology this morning, and it was dealing with the start of the episode was dealing with the whole Shea Stadium thing, and Lennon going, "Oh, we couldn't really hear ourselves," and Ringo saying, "Oh, we started playing really, really badly." Actually, a lot of the clips that they play, maybe they only pick the, they still sound really good. The fact that they couldn't hear it and they felt they were being lazy. Okay, some of the Stone Roses clips you hear, Ian Brown is singing pretty well. So when he's good, he's pretty good. When he's bad, it is, oh my word, it is um, something to behold. But that element here is important because quite often, partly on this song, but then throughout the album, quite often you are just getting an instrument, a drum, and a vocal. And, you know, that can vary from For No One, you know, without the drum, just, you know, the orchestration, the horn, and the vocal. Or on this, perhaps you're getting, you know, a sparseness. You're getting bass and a drum and vocal. Or at times, if you know, add the guitar in as well. There's not much more to it. We're not getting that sort of multi-layered production that just kind of drives me nuts. And it might be why then I quite like a lot of that music from the, you know, the early 80s. Sort of the thoughts that come to mind at the moment. The first song that popped in my head was Yazoo Only You, where it's Vince Clarke and a little keyboard, a drum machine, and Alison Moyet singing, for example. You know, Soft Cell would be another example. Um, you know, I do also like the lavish productions. ABC's Lexicon of Love is one of the greatest albums of all time. Fact, no argument, and move on. But there's something really powerful about minimalist or minimalism in terms of, and I guess partly it was because of the number of tracks they had to record on and the impact it had if you recorded and then, you know, basically condensed that into one track and then, you know, added to it. It's going to have that impact, but it brings a power to it that is missing from a lot of, I'm going to sound old here, modern music.
I mean, you're not wrong about the technological stuff. That's for sure. Having everything reduced to, you know, a 4 track studio does mean that you have to be incredibly efficient about the way that you record stuff. I have a slight, so this is slightly tangential, but I have a slight
I've just
bugbear.
been into stuff about the Stone Roses for 2 minutes, mate. You tangent away.
Okay, it is still Beatles relevant. It's okay, but about the like some of the like really new remixes that were done for like the Red and Blue albums. Is it last year? I
Okay.
think in 2024 or 2023. I forget now. Some of them deal with issues like the way that when tracks are bounced down, so condensed, as you say, they can sometimes get pushed all the way to the left or all the way to the right of the stereo picture. So everything's coming out one ear or coming out the other. And these mixes kind of, in a heavy inverted commas here, correct that so that everything sounds a little bit more central. It sounds a little bit more natural, and particularly in kind of like modern stereo systems or headphones, it sounds a little bit more natural. And in a way, that's an understandable desire to have because you want things to, but it's also kind of, it's a very ahistorical thing because that's not what the releases sound like. And I know they're not replacing the original releases as such, but part of the technological limitations that were imposed on the band were the fact that they had 4 tracks and they had to do what they could with that. And what they can do with it evolves. And that's the whole thing. Like Rubber Soul, Revolver, and Sergeant Pepper are all recorded in 4 track. In fact, everything except for Abbey Road is 4 track. And they developed how they could use what they had available to the maximum effect. So you're right, like everything on Revolver is quite minimal, particularly even compared to Sergeant Pepper coming next. It's much more lush, it's much more varied, there's much more texture and instrumentation, and they learn how to do this. Not just the Beatles, but people like Jeff Emmerich and George Martin learn how to work with the technology they're using to get more out of it. But part of that process is things like when they did bounce downs to get more stuff on the 4 tracks. Stuff sometimes got pushed all the way to the left or all the way to the right of the stereo picture. And removing that from those new mixes, on the one hand, I mean, the mixes sound mostly very good. Of course they do. It's Giles Martin, it's modern technology, blah, blah, blah. It sounds great. But you are losing a fundamental aspect of the way that the music was actually released. And I kind of, that, that annoys me. It's not a George Lucas Star Wars special editions where where he's tried to like suppress the originals and you can never ever see them again.
Not try to, he has.
Well, yeah, he has. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's not as bad as that, but it's the same impulse. Like you're correcting something that doesn't need to be corrected because that's how the song sounds. And to kind of draw this sort of background to Taxman. Taxman weirdly doesn't really suffer from that. Everything is I mean, the production in Taxman is just beyond brilliant. Of course it is. But everything sits really comfortable. And there's that sense that they are pushing the technology to kind of like as far as they can, but they're not yet advancing beyond that. And that's something that we'll see, particularly obviously when we get to stuff like Tomorrow Never Knows, or even She Said, there's a real advancement in what they can achieve with this technology. But right here in Taxman, what we have is an attempt to do everything that they can do with things as they are to the very best of their ability with the music. And it's breathtaking what can be done with just that.
Absolutely. And a lot of that comes down to the quality of the playing, whether that's some of the rhythms that Ringo is belting out, the famous, infamous bass line, or that offbeat guitar as well, or indeed as the whole kind of thing about McCartney's guitar solo, which is just energy incarnate, isn't it? You sort of imagine for all his baby face, sort of thumbs aloft charm, he can wield a mighty guitar when he chooses to, which is just utterly fascinating. Um, I think this is quite good for setting a marker down for a lot of the rest of the album. Although, of course, they will take so many turns, and so then the shift from this to "Got to Get You Into My Life," for example, is just enormous. And then we've got For No One as well. Again, another shift, but they all have their own kind of power and punch. And I think this is a really good statement to have at the start of the album, in the same way that Drive My Car is a really good statement to have the start of the album. I just think that Revolver carries this through a lot more consistently than Rubber Soul does.
I would entirely agree with that. Absolutely, yes. And I think consistency is one of the kind of more overlooked qualities of Revolver because there is such a variety of music on it. Obviously, you've mentioned Got to Get You Into My Life for No One, but yeah, we also have Yellow Submarine and Eleanor Rigby on the same album.
Yeah,
it's such an oddly diverse group of songs that nevertheless cohere into this kind of whole in a way that I mean, I would say that Revolver that Rubber Soul gets 75% of the way there, but doesn't
Yeah,
quite get it over the line in the way that Revolver does. And I think the only other two albums you could maybe argue, well, you could maybe make a case for A Hard Day's Night, but certainly Sergeant Pepper and Abbey Road are the only other two that manage that cohesion. That's not to necessarily talk about the quality of the individual tracks on those respective albums, but they have that cohesion. And yeah, I think you could maybe make a case for A Hard Day's Night. But it's kind of fascinating to see it spool out in this way. And if there is one thing that we've carried through, I think, consistently over this song and the previous two, Rain and Paperback Writer, it's that everybody is like pretty much at the top of their game here. Lennon doesn't have a vast amount to do on this, but even so, like he's still contributing. We talked about Ringo's drums on Rain in the previous episode, which is startlingly good. Like yeah, he thinks it's a career best, and who am I to argue? But he's as good here. Like the work that Ringo's putting in is absolutely astonishingly good and in perfect like support of the material. Yeah, McCartney's guitar solo is just a thing he tossed off. That's not the main thing he's doing in the song. His bass lines are just breathtaking in this. I keep using the B word. I'll try and find another way of expressing that. But like it's amazing. And then also here's the guitar solo that everyone remembers. And even George with like the main guitar line. I say even George as if it's somehow not his song. We've kind of seen the evolution of Beatles music, and Taxman musically is an evolution from the stuff that we've had so far. But like that offbeat, the only other song I can think in the Beatles back catalogue that does that is "She's a Woman," and this is a million times better and more sophisticated than "She's a Woman." And I like "She's a Woman"; it's a good song, but it's not Taxman.
and again, to accentuate the differences between things they've done before, we have a very rare example of a call and respond type relationship between the George and the backing vocals as well,
Yes, yes.
which for whatever one might feel about the actual words being said, I mean it's pretty playful and adventurous as well. And I suppose also I think as much as anything we're talking about the evolution of the Beatles music, but George, wow, where did you pluck this one from? And it is again, it's interesting looking at that episode of Anthology. He was, Ringo was talking about, bringing out that anecdote about how he was trying to write songs, and whenever he would present them with a song, they'd all fall about laughing because all he'd done was basically rewrite an old standard. And then you have George admitting that at that point he was struggling as well to come up with a significant number of songs. Well, if he's struggling to come up with a number of songs, certainly the quality of songs that he's producing has stepped up again from Rubber Soul. So in that short period of time, suddenly we've got this. Can you suddenly have an evolution? No, let's call it a revolution in his songwriting ability, or perhaps his confidence. And whatever one may feel about his sophisticated knowledge of the political scene, at least he is addressing vastly different subjects as well. I mean, just going back to don't bother me. And you just think, oh, all right, George, okay, bless you. Now we're really getting somewhere in terms of the ambition of what they're trying to write about. One may have personal opinions in terms of the sophistication of it. However, he's going for it, and that's good. It's ambitious.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting you mentioned the call and response actually, because yeah, particularly if you compare this to the sort of come ons in something like Please Please Me, I mean, this is a world apart from that, and it is much more sophisticated, and we're not talking about again a great leap in terms of time. You're talking like a handful of years. It's not a vast difference, and yet. Yeah, the confidence and what can be done with them is so much more advanced. It's wonderful to see, and I mean, in some ways, Revolver is almost like George's high watermark as far as the Beatles are concerned. He has 3 songs in the album, which will never be percentage wise matched again. Obviously, he has more in the White Album, but that's a separate case. And not just numerically, but the quality of the material he's producing is just amazing. And I'm not going to dive too far into the other 2 songs. Of course, we'll get to them in due course. But yeah, I mean, obviously, you're right to sort of mention the sheer revolution, if that's the word we're going to use, in what he's capable of producing. And I know there's a few stories floating around about, oh well, he was helped with a little bit of lyric, or he was given little nudges here and there, but ultimately it's still a George song, and he deserves all the credit in the world for it. It's the fact that other people contributed isn't in some way a demerit. It doesn't take away from the quality, particularly the musical quality of what's being produced, any more than him playing a guitar solo on a Lennon or McCartney song. That doesn't diminish them either.
Then you get into conversations about bands who just decided to split money 4 ways, regardless of who wrote the song. Whether that's U2 or REM, often examples of that kind of thing. And obviously there was that tension in terms of the realization that Paul and John were getting vastly more of the money, and yet then the conversation is, well, if George writes a guitar solo on a Lennon and McCartney song, and that's an integral part of the song, isn't he writing the song as well? McCartney, did George tell McCartney what to play on his bass for Taxman? And yet the bass is one of the most significant parts of the song. At what point does Ringo's drumming move just from being, part of the arrangement and again an integral part of the song? Which is, I think, something that's worth thinking about, because it does affect a lot of bands.
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, you mentioned like U2 and REM there, but like another obvious example, the vast amounts of fallout from the Smiths and Morrissey and Marr taking like full songwriting credits for everything as well.
Talking Heads as
yeah,
well.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. There's lots of them examples there.
There sure
In
is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know legally what the status is from my brief time in a band as well. Which is, if you write the lyrics or if you write the chords, you're the songwriter, and if you contribute anything else, you're not. That's
Unless the band agree
yeah,
otherwise.
yeah, exactly, yeah. But officially, like legally, that's where it is, unless you have well, we split everything equally kind of way. And like I said, it's not in any way demerit that McCartney, produced that guitar solo rather than George doing it. I mean, it's the right thing for the right song, and that's always ultimately far more important than anything else. Same with Ringo's contributions. Ringo's just brilliant in this song. Really, just hard to express how good he does of a job. And the song would be less good if it was, for example, if it was McCartney on drums. McCartney's a perfectly all right drummer as far as the 1960s are concerned, but he's not. He can't hold a candle to Ringo. He just can't. And that, again, that's not a demerit. He's not a drummer per se. He's a multi-instrumentalist. But yeah, I mean, who can hold a candle to Ringo at this point? I mean, not many. And the song would be lesser for not having Ringo doing what he does here.
So, at what point then do we dive into the lyrical content?
Well, I think now is probably the time. We can only put it off for so long. We've sung the praises of the song. We have, I think, fully established that it is a piece of music that we both think is excellent. So, well, let's touch on the touchy, shall we?
So, I think some of the lines are quite clever. Some of the phrasing is very effective. I just think it's a very British approach to a protest song. If other people may not regard it as a protest song, it might be a social commentary, whatever. It's just a very, I mean, The thing you are not going to like this. The thing that I would compare it to, younger listeners, is I recall the backlash to a very well-meaning song that came out, I think in the, I'm going to say mid, no, late 80s, which was a very well-meaning song as a comment on homelessness. And oh, isn't homelessness bad? And shouldn't we all try and do our best to help people who are homeless?
I think I know
Uh,
where you're going with this.
yeah, to me, this is the mid '60s equivalent of Phil Collins' "Another Day in Paradise."
Yeah, I don't think it's as bad as that, but then I think Another Day in Paradise is one of the worst songs ever recorded. I just loathe Phil Collins with the burning passion of 1,000 Fiery Suns, but that's my issue, not anybody else's. I kind of agree. Like there is obviously something very odd about somebody earning that much money complaining about having to pay tax. Yeah, pay your taxes. But I think it is slightly more nuanced than that. Apart from anything, 95% tax rate is absurd at pretty much any level. And they weren't raking it in the way that we are used to at that sort of point.
Please, and remember, it's not going to be, if it is 95% income tax, it's not going to be 95% of all earnings. It would almost certainly be, and I've tried to research this. It's really hard to find
Yeah, it's
specific
really
figures.
complicated.
It's most likely to be 95% over a particular threshold. However, I'm going to refer to your friend and mine Wikipedia here, which says it amounts to 95% of unearned income, i.e., interest on savings and investments. Interest on savings and investments. So if that is correct, and I have not had time to have a look at it comes from a particular book, so it's referenced in a book. I'll be interested in potentially sort of delving into that a bit further. Then we are not talking about 95% income tax, but tax on unearned income. So that is a completely different thing. Now you can then argue the rights and wrongs economically. Should we be taxing that much when what we want to do is to get individuals to invest in order to boost the economy, so on and so forth? Well, I don't think the political conversation was directed in that way at that time. But it is, in my mind, this is the kind of song that when you first listen to it, especially if you listen to it when you're young and relatively kind of open to these influences, you go, yeah, sock it to the man. Yeah, you tell him, George. Yeah, absolutely. We should be allowed to keep our money. And then as I've grown older and perhaps I sort of thought differently about politics, part of me is thinking, well, he would have been earning a lot of money, especially in relation to an awful lot of people in the country. And I do think pay your tax. And I'm going to go off on another tangent here. Don't pull your punches either, because you pull your punches because you say, Mr. Wilson. Oh, but just for balance, I'm going to have a go at Mr. Heath as well. And you're like, okay, all right, George. Perhaps I'd admire your view on this a little bit more if you just socked it to the man. If you felt that it was, Harold Wilson's Labour, recently re-elected Labour government that was the cause of all of this. I just think this is just so typical. I mean, it makes Pink Floyd's Money sound sophisticated in my mind,
Yeah.
and that to me is a low point in social commentary. But this is me. This is my view that has changed over time, and maybe it's also partly influenced by the fact that I know George is a mass of contradictions, who is very much peace and love, but drive the living daylights out of cars on normal roads and whatever. George, bless you, you were a quirky old sod, but you could write a good tune.
Yeah.
Not always in love with your lyrics, mate.
Well, I mean, again, I think there's a couple of things that are worth addressing there as well. Firstly, he was 23 when he
Fair
wrote
point.
this. And I, I,
Fair
I
point.
think I think that is important to acknowledge. I doubt my political sophistication was that advanced at 23 either. So yeah, I think there's nuance to be had there a little bit as well. But I think there's also something really interesting to be said about, and I'm going to fully admit that I'm not fully qualified to talk about this. I'm not like
You're
a
not a
big.
tax lawyer.
I'm not. Well, I was going to say I'm not a social historian, but it's that idea that particularly, the Beatles, they come from a working class or a mostly working class background. I'm sure Aunt Mimi would balk at that, but for the most part, they come from a relatively poor working class north of England background, and the traditional political affiliations with that would be left wing. It would be the Labour Party. It would be pretty much almost not completely, but largely, and that's shifting now. But I don't want to start talking about reform and all that bollocks. So but there would have been a very strong tendency towards that, especially if you knew anyone who was working in the docks, who was working in heavy industry, all that kind of stuff. But they've emerged out of that, and they are now in this position where they have money, they have status essentially like nobody in history has really ever had before, out with kind of politicians and royalty. That this is kind of a unique position that they're in historically, and it's kind of interesting to see somebody who has come from that background react in this way, because yeah, of course, pay your taxes. Taxes benefit everyone. I think there was some interview where John Lennon was interviewed by somebody in the Netherlands, and he complained about paying taxes and was shocked when the journalist from the Netherlands turned around and said, but everyone should pay taxes because all of society benefited. And he didn't really get it. And that's Lennon, who has a more, well, I was going to say has a more sophisticated political outlook than George Harrison. Maybe that's not correct. Who was more involved in politics. Direct politics is maybe a better way of putting it. But, they come from that kind of background. But they're still kind of locked into that framework where they can't see kind of beyond it. And for somebody like Lennon to be challenged in that way kind of helps to expose that a little bit. And I think there's some of that in Taxman as well. George hasn't, again, he's 23, but he hasn't broken out of that framework where he can see other ways of looking at the world.
We're not necessarily, although both history graduates, not necessarily up on the subject as others who could comment on it. But I do think there was a much greater sense of, I'll do air quotes here, deference in even after universal suffrage, where many in the working class believed that those who had knowledge of power would be in the right position to look after them, and let's distrust perhaps some of those who come from our own backgrounds who were looking to move in those areas. Obviously, in the 60s, we're starting to see that change, and we're starting to see the end of that deference, of which the
But it
Beatles
is
are.
the start of the process.
Yeah, which the Beatles are a part of that, in no small part through being given the MBEs, for example. And yeah, he was 23, but Dylan was 25, and there's a catalogue of songs written by Dylan in before 66 as well, which are just phenomenally powerful and grasping some issues that, not, okay, Lennon to an extent, and let's not even talk about Give Ireland Back to the Irish, that the other Beatles don't really tackle. And George, remember, well, let's just say Natural Law Party, and if you don't know about it, Google it, folks. That's all I'm going to say about that. You know, America is, and maybe it's just the political scene in America at the time because you are starting to get the impact of the Vietnam War, but perhaps more importantly, although linked to that as well, you are seeing the civil rights movement that is just blowing up, and I can't help but feel that that if we were to look at the the height of protest music in the 60s in the UK, we might find that people would mention Taxman, which compared to Sam Cooke's a change is going to come. I mean, they're not on the same page. They're not even in the same book. So it's a personal expression of how he feels. Fine, I get that, George. You're young. You're a bit peed off. You want a bit more of your money. But as something that could be considered protest, I think it is at best naive.
Yeah, I think that is ultimately the word that describes this song, naive. And the pace of societal change is I think probably something that we'll be touching on quite a lot during the next couple of albums. But it is interesting, like you're saying, like we are losing that deference to the establishment, to the upper echelons of kind of British society. But I mean, when did, that was the week that was start. Was that 64?
I
60?
don't know.
Yeah,
I
but
don't know.
that's one of the big
Yeah,
kind of cracks in the armor here. But I mean, what's that next to the assassination of like Kennedy or Martin Luther King
yeah,
Jr. or something like that?
yeah.
The rise of the civil rights movement. Like you mentioned Vietnam, but it is also worth mentioning like the aftermath of the Korean War as well, which is also very very recent memory. There are still that in this period there are veterans coming back that is impacting the way that America views its own society. Vietnam obviously will do the same thing, but to a vastly greater extent. All these things are bubbling up, but in the UK, it is a much slower. It's both a slower process, but it's also taking different forms. The way that kind of social evolution is occurring is much less advanced than it is in America, and honestly, really much less advanced than it is on the continent as well. If you look at West Germany and France in this period as well, 66 will have 69 will have the student uprisings or whatever, and this big kind of surge that never really happens over here. There isn't an equivalent of that really occurs in Britain. And there are things that have. There's the Million Man March in America, if you want to cite Woodstock and those kind of things as well. The Isle of Wight Festival is not in the same. It's not in the same league. So there is a lot of societal shift going on, but at this point, Britain is just kind of behind the curve. And yeah, comparing something like Taxman to Dylan or even Guthrie or anything like that. Like it's miles behind, but the pace of societal change is also moving very differently.
I would like to make a case that there are better songs relating to social commentary um, on this album and Sergeant Pepper. For example, Dr. Robert, and changing attitudes towards, shall we say, medication, or She's Leaving Home,
Mm.
which tells a really powerful story about you know the relationships and between parents and children, and there's so much going on in some of these songs that I think that Taxman effectively is gets elevated in that discussion because of the title, and because that word is repeated you know throughout, and also I suppose because when playing Beatles songs live, Paul has a much wider range of songs to draw from. When George was still doing live performances, you know, even towards the end of his live career, he would still bring out Taxman as well. And then he'd do that hilarious thing of updating the names to Mr. Major or Mr. Bush. I go, oh, George, you wag. Oh, you are just a bundle of fun and energy, aren't you? Um, yeah, anyway. However, it's worth saying that George's singing continues to improve, with one minor exception, and I would love to hear him actually say the word declare without his Scouse accent, because that kind of momentarily throws me out of the song. Declare the pennies on your eye. Bless you, George.
There
Bless you.
are there are few more Scouse pronunciations in the Beatles back catalogue than that line. But you're not wrong about the singing, and I think that is also worth mentioning. Like he's continuing to not just improve the way that he's singing in a technical sense, but the way that he's delivering lines, the way that he can be sarcastic, or the way that he can be snide, or whatever it is, like, or even sincere. God help us all. But there's more texture to the way that he's delivering the lines, as well as the fact that he's just technically a better singer now.
Absolutely, fair enough. And for all the simplicity, well, the difficulty in terms of playing, this, of course, was never going to be a song that was ever really going to get played. Like, you can't imagine, even when they were still touring, them slipping in this alongside Nowhere Man, for example. It just doesn't quite work. But there you go. It's one of those that it must have only really been when Harrison started playing live for himself that it would ever have got performed live, which is quite an interesting thought. Yeah. Ah, dear. Oh, George, we love you so. But sometimes we take the rough with the smooth, don't we?
We do have
Yeah.
to. We do have to.
So we're entering into interesting territory here, because of course we've got some songs that are regarded as classics. I would say this is a classic, whether or not in a few minutes' time when we discuss it, you're a 7 or an 8 or a 9 out of 10. It is a classic. Because remember, a 7 for a Beatles is probably a 5 for Rolling Stones. Anyway, um, covers. Have you
Yes.
encountered any decent covers?
I, I, I mean, this is going to sound like the most obvious thing in the world, but I really like the version that Tom Petty does in the concert for George.
Oh, I can't
It's
stand that.
really. Oh, I quite like it.
Oh,
Oh,
I
I
just
quite
it's
like it.
I don't think his voice suits it at all.
Oh, I quite like that. I like the different texture to his voice. I think it's quite interesting hearing it from that perspective.
Interesting. Okay, fair enough. Well, I'm going to give you what is default one of or two of the best covers of any Beatles song. And actually, this is might be a little bit of a surprise. It's a bit of a deep cut. It's actually a B-side by the Beastie Boys.
Okay.
Oh no, hang on. Sorry, that was a cover of Start by the Jam, which is also which is also the other default best cover of any Beatles song. And I love the Jam.
I
But
am very aware of this fact.
how they got away with that is anyone's guess. I mean, there was an interview with Bruce Foxton where he said, "Oh, well, Paul McCartney didn't sue us, so everything must have been okay." I think, right. I'm not sure, would Paul McCartney been able to sue on the basis of his bass line?
No, definitely
And
not. What you need to say is George Harrison didn't sue us because he
well,
wrote it, and it's not even
exactly.
Northern songs. It's Harris songs. So yeah,
And
it's no, McCartney is not the issue here.
George does have experience of litigation for this kind of thing. So, goodness knows how he managed to get away with it, but they got away with it. But it is, and I the Beastie Boys cover of Start is really good, by the way. It's mostly instrumental, but it's just so good. If you only know the Beastie Boys for their breakthrough song in the UK, then you need to look into them a bit more, dear listener, because there's some phenomenal work there. But Start is just, and I would have heard Start before I heard Taxman,
Yeah, yeah.
because whilst I think I might have been a year or two behind on the Jam, I suspect that I really became aware just as they were breaking up. Um, so there's the last couple of albums, the Jam were very much like the Beatles, and they released albums at a rate of knots. Paul Weller's writing at that point was just so prolific. They just, they packed so much into such a short period of time. But then when they broke up, a whole load of their singles got re-released, and I think I must have got hold of a few at that point. And Start is lyrically, to me, and this is perhaps an unfair comparison because it's a different lyrical focus. It is much more about um, it's about a relationship, but the way in which Paul Weller is writing about that relationship, probably at age of about 21, 22 himself, is just so sophisticated and so mature. And I think that's another reason why I then look at George at his age and go, yeah, you could have done with that. You really could have. But
Yeah. But again,
yes,
20 years of history changes
I
a
know,
lot as
I
well.
know,
So
I
that's
know.
I sound like I'm making excuses for George. That's not my intention. It's more context than excuse.
Yeah, no, I will give you that. But yeah, ladies and gents, I give you Start by the Jam. And if you're one of our dozens of American listeners and you've never really encountered the Jam, because they didn't really have success in America. Just do the singles. Just start with the singles, because there's some absolute gold in there. And let's take social Paul Weller's social commentary in something like Eton Rifles, for example, which has significantly more depth than I know 20 years of history, blah blah
Yeah,
blah. Get on with it.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah, or
um,
even down in the tube station at midnight, honestly.
yeah. I mean, but there's tons of stuff. Yeah, no, no, I'm not doing a. I've said no to you about doing an REM podcast. Anyone out there as well? I'm not doing a jam one. I'm out after this in 5 years' time.
Yeah, exactly. Assuming we both make it that far, we'll worry about it when the time
Yeah.
comes.
By the way, I was assuming you've got nothing else on covers or indeed the jam.
No,
I
all good,
was
thanks.
I was disappointed because watching the my first ever episode of Anthology, having missed it all the first time round in the mid 90s. I specifically just went straight for the episode that covers, some of the end of the live period and then Rubber Soul and Revolver. It seems to skate over things very, very quickly. It talks more about Rain than the Revolver, for example. But at least for on Revolver, it is purely about George being a bit miffed about tax, and then Paul saying something about, oh yeah, it was really clever because reminded us about inheritance tax. And, okay, all right, nice. T- Tell me how you came up with the baseline, or what influenced you with the melody or the yeah. But I just find I guess I'm being a little bit cynical about Beatles content at the moment because I'm not really picking up too much that's new, and I'm seeing there's an awful lot of product out there, and I get the feeling that there are people who will just say it's brilliant. Whatever it gets released, they say it's brilliant. And actually, just to track back, when I mentioned that thing about George updating the lyrics to Taxman, that actually came from a YouTube video that I saw, which was rehearsal footage of him in the early 90s, presumably preparing to tour. I don't know if that was the one with Clapton in Japan, or maybe that was
Yeah, I think
earlier.
that's 91 or 92. I think that's
Okay,
the same tour, yeah.
so it would have been that. And the comments underneath that was like, "Oh, George, you're so clever at updating it. Oh, yeah. So yes, yeah, well done for. Oh, he's so clever. He managed to comment on politicians at the time. And, yay, good. Okay, we're so uncritical. Or maybe it's just that those are the only people that comment because there's no point. Some people just think, well, no point me expressing an opinion on this.
Well, I mean, it's all self-selecting anyway, isn't it? You just
Yeah,
never read the comments. They're never the most edifying parts of humanity, whatever publication or website you're looking at, unless of course it's ours, in which case that's entirely different. But yeah, I mean, just sort of on the Beatles content point, I did watch all of Anthology back in the day, but I don't think I've ever seen it since. And I watched episode one actually last night, and it was really great to see how amazing the sound was. But a lot of it, I mean, I described it as party line earlier on, and that's exactly what it is. And we've mentioned a few times that the Beatles were kind of nothing. They weren't really a band that were cool to like during the 80s and early 90s when you and I were teenagers. And indeed, I think you're kind of like the first big Beatles nerd I knew when we first
No.
met at university. It was one of the things we had in common. So, oh my God, there's another one, and he's even taller than me. What the fuck? Anthology is part of the process of putting the Beatles squarely back into the mainstream, of mythologizing them, of reasserting their place at the kind of the pinnacle of the sort of pop mountain, I think. And that means that when you have something like Anthology, it is inevitably it's party line stuff. It's you'll have to forgive me for dipping into my own little world here, but it's the equivalent of going to a Doctor Who convention and hearing the actors trot out the same stories about what happened on set. You know, you've heard them 50 times before. You'll probably hear them 50 times again, but it's fine. It's entertaining enough. You know, A, hearing them say them, and B, judging the terrible, terrible fashion choices that nearly everybody seems to have made in the mid 90s, to say nothing of George's just awful moustache. But you know, it's a valuable document to have, but it is as party line as it could possibly be, other than the odd occasion where George is visibly pissed off at Paul McCartney.
So I'm going to take I'm going to slightly push back on that, and I'm going to say that that's a slightly revisionist view, because I would argue that the Beatles were never more prominent in their post breakup period than in the mid 90s, before the release of Anthology, primarily due to the primacy in 94, 95 of Oasis. And I think bands like Oasis really elevated the Beatles back. And even when Parklife by Blur was released, there were comparisons made to Sergeant Pepper, for example. So and just on a point in particular, whatever was released in December '94, a full year ahead of Anthology. And remember that that was a song that was so Beatles-esque. They didn't get sued by the Beatles. They got sued by Neil Innes because of the similarity to how sweet it is to be an idiot.
Everything that goes
So
around comes around.
exactly. So I wonder if without the push by some of those bands, I'm not going to say that it was Britpop, but that sort of pushing again. Let's just say anti-grunge. Let's try that. And a more kind of unique British voice. Ugh, I hate myself for saying that. But I think that did reintroduce a lot of people to the Beatles. I think a lot of people found the Beatles through listening to some of those bands. And I wonder, without those, would there have been the interest? Or put another way, without George desperately needing the money, would there have been
I
the
think that's the one. I think it's Georgian money because they've been trying to. I mean, they've been trying to do this since pretty much the early '70s with
yeah.
the Long and Winding Road, or whatever it was going to be called back then, and then they finally got off the ground when George ran out of cash. Ironic for the song that we're covering this week.
I
I think it might have. It may have begun a groundswell, but I think Anthology. I mean, certainly Anthology would have happened anyway. And I still think it's probably more significant in sort of repositioning it. But that's not to say that there isn't anything of what you're saying. I think there may be influences there as well.
Okay, yeah, that's not going to be quite on the Joe Cocker with a little help from my friends agree to disagree scale.
No,
Um,
we're not going to agree to anything when we get to with a little help from my friend. We're going to argue violently, possibly fall out and never speak again, and bring this podcast to a crashing end.
so I'm in a okay. So now on the point scale, I'm in a slight dilemma because
Okay, dilemma me up, baby.
I do think some of George's lyrics are well written. There's some interesting phrasing in there, some interesting ideas. The declare your pennies on your eye is good. The whole um, feet tax your feet, and all of that sort of stuff. Drive a car and tax your seat, whatever it is. There's some well written bits in there, even if I feel that the overall tone is that could have been done by a 6-year old. Um, and musically, it is fantastic, and it kicks off the album with an absolute bang. And if I was giving half points, which I refuse to do, it would firmly be 7.5. but I think I'm going to go with an 8 for all of my reservations about the politics of it. I think we just have to recognise the fact that this is a step up. I know George said that he preferred Rubber Soul. Good for him. But I think again, it's one of those things. If you're listening to Rubber Soul and listening to Revolver, and I think you're having to work at deciding that Rubber Soul is better than Revolver. I think that emotional impact of Revolver is just so much bigger. And Taxman really starts off that emotion, and you think you're going to go in one direction on this album, and you end up going in every direction on this album.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting because I'm also going to give it an 8. So we've been disagreeing, if not vehemently, then definitely. And then we've both ended up giving it precisely the same score as well. Yeah, I think, like I said at the top of the episode, yeah, the lyrics obviously are maybe not as sophisticated as they could be, but the music is so good. It covers for almost everything. And yeah, it is worth mentioning, like, even if you disagree with the stance that he's taking here, there is some lyrical cleverness going on there. There's some nice plays with words. There's some intelligent phrasing, and yeah, his performance is good on it as well. So that if it doesn't overcome everything, it does overcome something. So yeah, I'm going for an 8 in this one as well.
And next time, folks, we're going to talk about death.
Yeah, because you can't really, well, death and taxes. I mean, what those are the two things you're meant to talk about, right?
Yep, yeah, it's the old Mark Twain thing, isn't it?
Exactly. Right, good. Before we delve into that, you can really get a hold of us. You can contact us by email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We're on Twitter at Beatles_ology, and we are Beatles Stuffology on Instagram. You can also find my blog at www.jgmcquarrie.scot, where I talk about books, film, TV, computer games, and whatever I feel like writing about. Please rate, and review the show on whatever podcatcher you're using so that more people can find us. Next episode, we move through the album to Eleanor Rigby. But until then, keep listening.